Hi, I'm Rabbi Pinchas Landis of Cleveland, Ohio, and I am the program coordinator for the TorahAnyone Tisha B'Av event. We are very excited to bring you some of the most inspiring speakers in the Jewish world to help us all find meaning on this most riveting of days. For 3,000 years, the Jewish people have looked towards Tisha B'Av as a day of introspection, a day to mourn past events and tragedies, but above all, a day to look at, to learn from, and to take inspiration from. This indeed is why we are still here as a people after 3,000 Tisha B'Avs. Because we don't look at events, no matter how dark they might be, as random. We look at them as building blocks to help us grow as people and to make us ever stronger as a nation. I invite you now to join me on a day of inspiration that, God willing, we will all grow from. And from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank you for joining us and thank you for your attention.
I am Rabbi Mordechai Becher, and I am here speaking for TorahAnyone. And it is Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, the 9th of the month of Av, which is what we would consider in Jewish tradition to be the national day of mourning. Mourning for tragedies from time immemorial past, and even tragedies of the present. And just to give you an idea of the enormity of the mourning and of the sorrow of Tisha B'Av, let's start all the way back when the Jewish people came out of Egypt and they sent spies to the land of Israel, which is normal. You normally need recon and intelligence in order to enter a land, military campaigns. But the spies came back with a message of despair. They said, it's hopeless. We will not be able to enter Israel. We'll not be able to conquer Israel. The land will consume us. It is terrible. And the Jewish people accepted that and despaired, even though they had witnessed the exodus from Egypt. They had experienced miracles. They had experienced divine providence that is unprecedented, still unprecedented. And nevertheless, they gave up hope and despaired. They lost belief in themselves and to a certain degree in God. And they were punished. That generation could not go into Israel. They spent 40 years, as you probably know, in the desert. But the events of Tisha B'Av, that was the night of the 9th of Av. But the events did not end there. Later on in history, the Babylonians, who modern-day Iraq and Iran, Babylonians invade the land of Israel, the Jewish state which existed then, and destroyed the temple in Jerusalem. And after the Jews had lived in Israel, now they had been living in Israel for over 800 years as an independent nation, they now had their first experience of exile. What a trauma. independence for 800 years. Most countries around the world have not been independent for that long. Independent for 800 years. The temple in the capital of Israel, in Jerusalem, the spiritual center, the political center, the legal center, the center of inspiration, and now was destroyed by the Babylonians. The Jews have now been exiled from the land of Israel. They're now in Babylon, Iraq, Persia, etc. We are a vassal nation. We lost our independence. We have lost our economy. And we are now living in Babylon. And that event, the destruction of that temple, again, on the 9th of Av, in approximately 500 or so BCE. The Jews eventually return to Israel, rebuild Jerusalem, rebuild the temple, rebuild the state, rebuild the country. And then we are plunged into conflict with the Seleucids in Syria, the Greeks, Hanukkah story. But then we restore, the Maccabeans are able to restore sovereignty for yet another 200 years. But unfortunately, their reign and their dynasty ended with a lot of infighting, assassinations, political intrigues, and eventually the Romans were invited in to restore order. Unfortunately, the Romans were not gracious guests. The Romans took over, suppressed Judaism, suppressed Jewish independence, suppressed Jewish nationalism, and the Jews revolted against the Romans 3 times. One of the Romans described us as the most revolting of people, and we revolted 3 times. The third revolt culminated, unfortunately, in the Romans bringing in more legions and destroying the Beis Hamikdash, the temple, yet again, destroying Jerusalem. The Roman general Tyrannus Rufus, in classic symbolic fashion of the Romans, runs a plow. They put dirt over the site of the former temple, runs a plow over it, sows it with salt. Horrific stuff. And the temple is destroyed, but that's not the end of all those tragedies. The Roman destruction caused, of course, the great diaspora, in which Jews were exiled all over the Roman Empire, to Gaul and to Sparta and to Hispania and to Anglia and to Morocco, and literally Jews all over the Roman Empire. Flavius, but Paul Johnson, in his book, History of the Jewish People, describes how the price of slaves in the Roman Empire went down by about 50% because there were so many Jews on the market being sold as slaves, Jewish prisoners of war, Jewish captives, innocent Jews. And of course, the land of Israel lay in complete destruction. Remnants of Jews remained there, oppressed later under the Byzantines, and so on and so forth, oppressed under the Romans, the Holy Roman Empire, etc. And then you'd think that's not enough for Tisha B'Av. No, it wasn't. 1096, the first crusade is declared in the month of Av, possibly on the 9th of Av itself. And the Crusaders, a band of knights and peasants and thugs, and they making their way to Israel, but as one of them said, Godfrey de Bouillon, he says, we are going to the Holy Land to rid it of infidels. And what of the infidels amongst us? And of course, he meant the Jews. And so the Crusaders came to the Rhineland in Germany, Mainz and Speyer and Worms, large Jewish communities of approximately 30,000 Jews in that area. And they cut through that area, forced baptisms and battles and torture and death. And out of the 30,000 Jews in the Rhineland, approximately 5,000 died. Some were murdered, some committed suicide, some were tortured to death. There were rapes, there were kidnappings. It was a horrific time, starting again on Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av or thereabouts. Later in history, Jews have been living in England since the time we were expelled from the temple, part of the Roman Empire. 1290, Jews were expelled from England. Again, in Av, the month of Av, around the 9th of Av. And then, that's not enough. 1492, Columbus sailed the oceans blue. But for us, 1492 has terrible connotations because that was the culmination of years and years of oppression of the Spanish Jews under the Inquisition, culminating in the the Alhambra decree of Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand to expel the Jews from the entire Iberian Peninsula, from Spain, 1492. Many Jews were drowned in hulks in the harbour. Jews had to give up all their possessions. Jews died on the way. Jews were attacked on the way. Refugees. Jews have been living in Spain for longer than Christians. And yet, horrific, terrible expulsion. And then many of those Jews went to Portugal, but then expelled from Portugal, 1497. But the 1492 expulsion on the 9th of Av, Tisha B'Av. Again, a repetition, a replay, a deja vu all over again. But it didn't end there. Many events later on in history happened on Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av. And so we understand that if you look in the prayers for Tisha B'Av, there are what's called kinot, or elegies. They are poems, tragic, sad poems composed by Jews, many of them eyewitnesses to some of these tragedies, that we recite, that we sing in sad tunes, that we cry about when we read them on Tisha B'Av. Because we are crying not only about those tragedies that happened precisely on Tisha B'Av, which itself is something incredible, but we're crying and we are mourning all the tragedies of exile, whether it was the First World War, the Second World War, Holocaust, the pogroms, the terrorism, etc. There's unfortunately a lot to cry about in our history. But, and this is something really important to keep in mind, it's true that there are many tragedies that happen on Tisha B'Av. And it's true that the Jews have suffered throughout history. But there is something very important to keep in mind. The Talmud tells us an incredible story. There are the ark that was built by Moshe, in the desert, in the tabernacle. Later on, it was in the temple. The ark contained the holy 2 tablets, the tablets of the law. On top of the ark, there was a gold cover called a kapores. And formed from the gold of that cover, there were 2 cherubs, angelic beings. One was the face of a male, one of a female. And they stood with wings covering the ark, facing each other. Very beautiful. And the Talmud tells us something which you'll find a little strange, but the Talmud says that these, even though they were made of gold, they would move and rotate. How would they move? When the Jewish people were fulfilling the will of God, when we were in a good relationship with God, the kruvim, the cherubs, faced each other. Man and a woman in love, smiling at each other. When the Jews were not fulfilling God's will, they would miraculously turn away from each other. This may be symbolic, but just keep this in mind. The story is then told that when the Romans entered the temple in Jerusalem on the 9th of Av, and Titus took his sword and slashed the curtains that separated the Holy of Holies from the rest of the temple. By the way, that's where all Jews all over the world, we pray in the direction of Israel. If we're in Israel, we pray in the direction of Jerusalem. If we're in Jerusalem, we pray in the direction of the Western Wall. If we're at the Western Wall, we pray in the direction of the Holy of Holies. So that was the place, the center. The high priest, the Kohen, could only go in there once a year. That was on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. So it was literally the holiest place on earth. So the Romans enter, he slashes the curtains that separate the Holy of Holies, and he comes in and he sees the cherubs embracing each other. They're hugging each other. And he has his soldiers take out this heavy gold statue, and he shows it, and he says, look at these crude, base, vile Jews. Look at what they worship. A man and a woman embracing. This is in the Holy of Holies of the Jewish people's temple. What a disgraceful bunch of perverts. And indeed, Jeremiah, the prophet Jeremiah, describes this in a verse in the book of Lamentations, Eicha, written by the prophet Jeremiah, who witnessed the destruction, predicted it and witnessed it. And he writes there, Kol ro'eha hiziluha bein hamatzorim, all those who saw her, meaning the Jewish people, the temple, hiziluha, they disgraced her, they debased her. during this period of time. And the Talmud says that refers to the Romans displaying the embracing cherubs to the world. It's an interesting story. And one of the great sages from Spain, actually from before the expulsion, Rabbi Yontef ben Alashbili from Seville, the Ritva in Hebrew. The Ritva writes, he says, I don't understand it. It sounds as if it doesn't sound as if the Talmud explicitly states that the cherubs were embracing each other, but yet, he says, it was in the midst of the destruction. Now, if the cherubs' relationship to each other is a reflection of the relationship of God and the Jewish people, and when we're not fulfilling his will, they turn away from each other. When we are fulfilling his will, they face each other. Whether you understand that literally or figuratively, it doesn't matter, but it certainly indicates the relationship. It's a reflection of that relationship. If so, he says, how could it be that in the midst of the destruction of the temple, punishment for the Jewish people's sins, God and the Jewish people, their relationship represented, reflected by these cherubs, are in a passionate, loving embrace? How could it be in the midst of the destruction? There should be. And the Ritva, I hope you understand the question, but the Ritva answers. He says that here we see an example of what we call nes l'ra'ah, a negative, painful miracle for the bad. Miracle for the bad. Now, normally we hear of a miracle. A miracle is a good thing. The Exodus from Egypt. Miracle. Amazing. The Hanukkah story, the Maccabees defeating the Greeks, the menorah lighting for 8. Miracle. Miracles are usually good things. When you hear of a miracle in Jewish history or in any miracle, that's fantastic. God did some amazing manifestation of his power, his compassion, his etc. It's a miracle. It's good. But the Ritva is telling us that there are sometimes miracles which are bad, miracles which are painful. And I'd like to try to understand what he means here. I think what he means is this. Miracle. In Hebrew, the word miracle is nes, which is actually the same as the Hebrew word for a banner, like a flag. So a banner is something which indicates who is below it, who is beneath, right? Soldiers hold up a banner in battle. You know that's this side, this part of this army. So a nes is something which indicates God's presence. It indicates God's involvement. It indicates God's divine providence. Usually, those indications are positive things. Whether it was, as I said, the Exodus, Purim, Hanukkah, so on and so forth. But there are occasions where God's presence is manifest, but it's unfortunately in a painful way, but manifest nonetheless. And I think that's what the Ritva means. You see, yes, it was the midst of destruction. It was the midst of the destruction of the temple and the punishment of the Jewish people. But what I think was trying to be indicated by this incredible story of the cherubs embracing each other is that when God punished us, he hadn't abandoned us. Punishment does not mean abandonment. Rebuke does not mean divorce. It doesn't mean God was and is still with the Jewish people. I think that is what the Talmud is trying to indicate to us. That despite the fact that there was a terrible stuff going on, despite the fact there was destruction going on, we should not see that as God turning his face away from us. We should not see that as an abandonment of the Jewish people. We should not see that as God having given us over to the forces of statistics and history and arbitrary forces. No, God is still involved. And I think that might be one of the messages of the 9th of Av. You see, the fact that again and again throughout history, tragedies kept occurring in the same month, sometimes on the very same day and hour as previous tragedies occurred. What that tells me is that this is not coincidence. This is not historical happenstance. This is not arbitrary statistics. This actually is the hand of God. And so we understand, I think, from all the events of Tisha B'Av, which we mourn and cry about and read these very powerful poems, elegies about these various events. And yes, it's appropriate to cry and to think about this. And it's difficult not to cry when we start thinking about the tragedies that have beset the Jewish people throughout our history. But on the other hand, crying about these events is not quite the same. It's not at all the same as giving up hope. It's not the same as despair. It's not the same as it's over. On the contrary, the fact that we have these events happening is in some sense a miracle, a bad miracle, meaning it's bad in the sense that they're painful and they're tragic and there was destruction. It's a miracle in the sense that it's still the hand of God. It is still God's involvement in our history. And this, I think, is the meaning of another story that is told in the Talmud. At the end of Tractate Makot, one of the sections of the Talmud, which interestingly deals with punishments, court-ordained punishments. But it ends with discussion about divine punishment of the Jewish people. And the story which it tells is a fantastic, amazing story. It tells that Rabbi Akiva was walking with a number of sages, and they were on Mount Scopus, Har Hatzofim, which is, Hatzofim means to look out Scopus, that's what it means. So from Mount Scopus, you can look out and see the Temple Mount. And they're walking along and they see the destroyed temple, and they see the ruins of the Holy of Holies. And there, running around in the ruins of the Holy of Holies, are jackals. Jackals usually only are found in uninhabited, abandoned areas, wild areas, not where people live, not where it's civilized, not where there's habitation. So seeing jackals in the Holy of Holies was to the rabbis an indication of the complete desolation of the temple, the complete destruction of the temple, turning it from a house into an abandoned, desolate, derelict wreckage where even jackals hang out. And of course, on seeing this, all the rabbis burst into tears. Rabbi Akiva, on the other hand, smiled. In fact, he even laughed. And the other rabbis turned to him and said, how could you be laughing? And he said, what do you mean? Why are you crying? That's why we're crying? The place in the world, the Holy of Holies, where the high priest, the pinnacle of holiness, purity, could only enter one day of year, the holiest day of the year, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And he can only enter it after months of preparation, after immersion, ritual purification, meditation, prayer, in its pristine state of spiritual purity. And he goes in there. And even there it's a little risky. And that place that the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, goes in once a year, Yom Kippur, to beseech God to forgive the sins of the Jewish people, is now so ruined, so desolate, so destroyed that there's jackals running around in the Holy of Holies. How can we not cry? And they were right. I mean, apparently. Rabbi Akiva responded that, he says, that's why I'm laughing. He says, because you see the prophecies of destruction, Shualim hilchubo, jackals shall walk there. He says those prophecies are always juxtaposed with prophecies of redemption. He says, so when I see with my own eyes the depths of destruction and the prophecies of destruction, that means I'm also seeing the beginnings of redemption. I'm also seeing the juxtaposed, connected prophecies of optimism, hope, and redemption connected to those prophecies of despair and destruction. He says, that's why I'm happy. That's why I'm smiling. And the other rabbis responded, Akiva, nichamtano. Akiva, you have comforted us. You've given us comfort. Because now when we look at the destruction, we too will look at it not as an end, we'll look at it as the next in the series of rebuilding and rejuvenation and redemption. And they were comforted by Rabbi Akiva. So I think what Rabbi Akiva saw was what the Ritva was describing, a nes l'ra'ah. He saw something bad, terrible, but he saw it as a miracle, i.e., the hand of God. It's my belief also that anti-Semitism to some degree is almost a miracle, but of an evil type, a bad miracle. But it does show the hand of God. You see, why do so many people of different groups, whether it's the far right and the extreme left, hatred for Israel, hatred for the Jews? Why is it that the Presbyterians, I think it was the Presbyterians in America, are pro-BDS? They want the state of Israel to be destroyed. They declare it to be an apartheid state. They, together with extreme Muslims, what do they have in common with each other? Why do these groups have this incredible hatred? That's one of the things that when you hear some of these people talk about Israel, it seems out of proportion. The level of hatred, the level of rhetoric, the level of passion and emotion seems completely out of proportion. I mean, they don't have anywhere near the same level of hatred, of outrage when it comes to Uyghurs in China being murdered, when it comes to state torture in Russia, in Saudi Arabia, when it comes to terrorism on the part of Hamas and Hezbollah. None of that, zero. They seem to be okay with that. The hatred and the passion for Israel, for the Jewish people. I think one of the explanations is the following: that the Jewish people, to some degree, are supernatural. What do I mean by supernatural? Because most ancient peoples from 3,300 years ago are no longer alive and kicking. The Etruscans you can find in museums in Italy. The Hittites you can find in the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. The ancient Assyrians in museums in Iraq, if they still exist. Most peoples of the ancient world either are no longer with us at all or are so different that they are no longer recognizable as the same people. The modern day Italians, not quite recognizable as the ancient Romans. Modern day Athens, not the same as the Athens of Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, and Pythagoras. Major differences in language, in philosophy, in religion, in politics. Very, very different. The Jewish people were described by a historian by the name of Arnold Toynbee, who wrote an 8-volume history of the world. He coined the term fossils of history. Arnold Toynbee called the Jewish people fossils. He said, you are fossilized, meaning we are probably not alive anymore. We should just give up on everything. And Toynbee felt that the Jewish people's revival, etc., he says, is something which is hopeless and something which just goes against the trends of history. I have a feeling that a lot of people, when they look at the Jews, they get a little uncomfortable. It's like seeing a velociraptor coming to life. I mean, we should be extinct thousands of years ago. We shouldn't be around. And yet, not only are we not extinct, not only are we not fossilized, but we have come back to our ancient land. Here I am in Israel, in an office in Jerusalem, talking to you about this. We have come back to our ancient land. We have millions, 8 million Jews living in the land of Israel. We've revived the Hebrew language, which was a language of prayer almost exclusively for 2,000 years, is now the daily language of millions of people. Books are written in it, scientific papers are written in it. We have thousands of people studying Torah, the holy books of the Torah, in the land of Israel on a regular basis. We probably have a greater quantity of people studying Torah than we ever had in history. We have an army where the kitchens are kosher. I served in the army. I have 3 sons. Kitchens are kosher. It's unbelievable, right? We have the Magen David as our symbol, right? We have a flag styled on the talus. The national day of rest in the state of Israel is the Sabbath, Shabbat, Saturday, Friday night, Saturday. It's miraculous. It is, but for us, what looks like a wonderful, amazing, miraculous event, positive, full of hope, approaching redemption, is for those who are opposed to our ideology, it's a contradiction. It's a problem. Jews should be fossilized. Jews should have been replaced by followers of one Messiah, followers of another Messiah, followers of this prophet, followers of that. Why are Jews still around? People see themselves, their religion, their philosophies has replaced all of this. whether it's atheism or socialism or whether it's forms of Christianity or Islam, they see Judaism as anachronistic. It's ancient. It's an ancestor, but it shouldn't be anymore. We've replaced you. But our very existence, despite everything, our very existence, maybe because of everything, is something which is disturbing to many people. It disturbs their worldview. It disturbs their deep-held convictions. We are from a different dimension, a dimension beyond time. And hence, even anti-Semitism is, to some degree, nes lara, it's a negative miracle. Negative, yes, but a miracle nonetheless. Abba Eban, the great Israeli diplomat, one of the best speakers I've ever heard, Abba Eban gave a talk in the 1950s at Yeshiva University, where I teach. And he said to the students, was not long after Arnold Toynbee had a very famous debate with Herzog, Yaakov Herzog. And Abba Eban said it very, very eloquently. I'm not sure if I can remember exactly how he put it, but he said this. He says, the fossils, not having read the 8 volumes of Toynbee's history, are unaware of their own petrification, and they continue to pursue national redemption and national revival as if they are alive. And indeed, he is right. We are still alive. Tisha B'Av, with all of its mourning and destruction, is evidence that it's not arbitrary, that God is still with us. The hand of God has not let go. The cherubs are still embracing. The relationship is still there. The fact that we are far from fossilized, the fact that we are alive and kicking, speaking Hebrew, living in our holy land, learning the texts of our holy Torah, and still living it, and still breathing it, and still representing it in such an amazing way, tells me that we, like Rabbi Akiva, despite the fact that I'm sure crying is appropriate, and I cry today, and it is normal to do that, understandable. But crying should not be confused with despair. And mourning should not be confused with the giving up of hope. We Jews are full of hope, are full of optimism. We don't despair. We cry and we mourn because of the tragedies and the suffering and the pain that we have experienced. But on the other hand, like Rabbi Akiva, we can still smile even on Tisha B'Av. We can still be full of hope even on Tisha B'Av, maybe especially on Tisha B'Av. The Talmud says beautifully that the Messiah was born on the time of the destruction of the temple. And Nachmanides says what that means is that redemption is born in the midst of destruction, that the light of ingathering the exiles, the light of God's divine providence, the light of his embrace is found even in the midst of destruction. And I think that, to me at least, is one of the great lessons of Tisha B'Av. So yes, we can cry over the pain, but let that not be a measure or a signal of despair. Because we are Jews, we know Hatikva Shnot Alpayim, the hope of 2,000 years, still beats strongly in the hearts of Jews all over the world, and has good reason for that hope to beat so strongly. And we, like Rabbi Akiva, can smile and hopefully, like his colleagues said, Akiva, you have comforted us. Akiva, you have comforted us. We look forward to a time when the Creator, the Almighty, will come to us and say, I have comforted you. I have comforted you. Thank you very much for listening, for watching. This is Mordechai Becher with Torah Anytime.
Hi, this is Shimon from Torah Anytime, and Torah Anytime is currently working on many new future projects. And if anyone out there is listening who wants to partner with us to hear what these projects are all about, to see if it's something that they resonate with, to see if there's something they want to back financially or partner with us in any other way, please reach out to me. My email is shimon@torahanytime.com. Let's have a conversation about it, and let's see if the new upcoming projects of Torah Anytime excite you.
Ruben Kolyakov here with Torah Anytime. You might have heard about 2 years ago, we came out with a new program called Chesed Anytime. Baruch Hashem, we have thousands and thousands of users. For those who are looking to do a chesed for somebody, or those who are looking for somebody to do a chesed for them, you can go to WhatsApp. If you have WhatsApp, currently it's a WhatsApp status. You could save this number on your phone, 929-602-9300, and WhatsApp message add me, and then you can check out the statuses. If you need a chesed done for you, you can message that number and let them know as well.
Okay, I have a life hack for you. You should just do this now. Trust me, you're gonna thank me later.
I wanted to take this opportunity to share with you something extraordinary.
Literally everybody is talking about
dailygiving.org.
Even $1 a day can make a huge impact.
With dailygiving.org, you sign up once, you set it, and you forget it.
Every single individual gives half a shekel, the rich and the poor, because everyone together is a part in making the change. And it always bothers me, how come we don't have half a shekel concept today? And then I was introduced to something amazing called dailygiving.org.
$1 doesn't really go very far in the current market. Lots of times you give $1 to this, $1 to that, and it doesn't really feel like it's making a big impact. But when you give it together as a community, it has a really meaningful impact.
100% of every dollar you give every day goes to help these organizations.
We're loading up another truck with groceries to the elderly.
We're able to provide services for over 50 families with kids with special needs and intellectual disabilities this summer due to the generosity, support, partnership, and friendship of everybody at Daily Giving.
This is equipment that is crucial for saving lives. We wouldn't have had this without support from Daily Giving.
You could see every day who's getting the money, how much they're getting, and you can go back to the very beginning when we started and see every day who got the money, and you see the dollars growing as more people sign up and more people sign up, and we get more momentum.
To give $1 a day, it's not asking too much, and if you can do it, you'll be able to hold your mitzvah.
It's like Klal Yisrael's one big giant virtual tzedakah box. And they take care of your donation and they make sure it goes to extremely worthy causes.
You have ranging from couples suffering with infertility to women with breast cancer to people suffering from poverty that need help with food and living accommodations.
They've helped people that I know very well to supply food for them and to help them make chasanas for their children.
It's so important that we're givers. It's so important that we are always flexing the giving muscle. And no matter what's going on, every single day I know that I've given something.
It's the one email I always read. It makes me feel like I actually gave that day.
I'm not that old, but I remember the days that you can get a slice of pizza for $1. Today, what can you get for $1? But when you put all of our dollars together, all of a sudden the dollar becomes huge.
The Gemara has an expression called pruta mitzdarefes lecheshbon gadol. When it comes to tzedakah, every penny counts.
One of my daughters actually today asked me, I have to give my tzedakah. Can I give to Daily Giving? It's not necessarily years worth, but can I give a few months worth? And to me it made me happy.
This is not instead of giving to other organizations. We want everybody to try to give $1 extra a day together, and that's how we can have a massive, massive impact.
So that is your life hack. Go now to dailygiving.org, sign up. You're gonna get those emails. They're gonna make your day.
You put me into quarantine and I did better. I can't touch another person, yet I'm touching thousands at a time.
Go check it out online right now. Look at the calendar and you will see every dollar that's given goes directly to another organization.
How do you get the biggest bang out of your buck, out of your dollar? It's called dailygiving.org.
What are the only days of the year in the Jewish calendar that we're allowed to be sad? Some people say, the fast days, Yom Kippur, Tisha B'Av. But in reality, there's only one day, and that's today. That's Tisha B'Av. There's only one day that we're allowed to be sad. We know simcha, joy, which there's no real way to translate that word into English. It's not just joy or happiness. Simcha is a state of being. It's a state of being that's unnatural to us just from existing. It's something we need to work on. People tend to believe that joy is the raw state of a person without problems. That if I were devoid of all issues in my life, if I had no problems, I'd be left with joy. This is why single people believe that happiness and joy lies in marriage. Some married people believe that joy and happiness rely in not being married. So many people believe that if my life was devoid of problems, if I'm poor and I was rich, I'd be happy. If I'm going through a difficult time and that time would end, I'd be happy. But that's not how joy works. Joy is not the absence of problems. The absence of problems are more petty problems. We still have the same distraught look on our face and in our lives. It's just over more petty, silly things. I've dealt with so many people going through so many different things. So many parents with children. This happens all the time. Where a parent will say to me, look, if he was doing this, and that, I'd understand. I'd be fine with that. I understand it's making trouble. The example they give is something that would be making trouble. I understand it's making trouble, but this that he's doing, this is already out of order. Until he goes to the next level, and they're like, if he was only doing that thing he was doing last month, I'd be fine. No, you weren't. You weren't fine. You're the same amount of distraught. It just changes now. We're not left with joy in our life. We're not left with happiness in our life just because we're devoid of problems. Happiness, joy is something we need to build. Something we need to work on. The problem with joy, the problem with happiness, and I know it seems like an odd day to be talking about joy and happiness, but in reality, no, it's not. It's not. Because one of the fundamental parts of being joyous, of being happy, one of the fundamental parts of living b'simcha is understanding our pain, is understanding what pain is understanding what sorrow, what loss is. The denial of pain, the denial of problems, the denial of sorrow, the denial of loss is what leads us to never truly understanding joy. We just think joy is at best a fake it till you make it situation. Today, I hope we're going to be able to go through a few steps, very quickly, just a few steps that we could take in order to actually attain joy, to actually acquire it. But in order to do that, we need to go through the mud, which we're going to see is not mud. We need to go through the beautiful parts that is what we have here, that is our lives, the beauty of what our lives are. So, the first thing we need to do is understand, what are we sad about today? We heard so many things, the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. So many things happen on Tisha B'Av. It's a sad day. But the first thing we need to realize today is, you know when something horrible happens and everyone's avoiding talking about it? If you're immediately involved in it. If you're not immediately involved in it, everyone's talking about it. If a tragedy happens and it's not immediately involved with you, everyone's talking about it. But if you're involved in that tragedy, no one wants to talk about it. Everyone wants to avoid the discussion, distract yourself, do something else. What's Tisha B'Av? Tisha B'Av is Hashem saying to us, is God saying to us, this is how you handle. This is how we're supposed to handle. Something bad happens. Something difficult happens. Feel it. Truly feel it. You know, I have to work with so many different victims of so many different types of abuse, and they'll all tell you the same thing. I work with a lot of therapists, they'll all tell you the same thing. When you sum it up, it's not the abuse that leads to the trauma. That's not what it is. The action within itself, the horrific action, if handled immediately, if opened up and spoken about immediately, has a very high chance of not having to lead to any real deep trauma. So where does all this trauma and difficulty come from? It comes from the shame. It comes from the being quiet. It comes from the denial of it. Now, no one's to blame. That's not the point here. As a side note, children who can't open up to their parents and talk about it is an issue. But no one's to blame here. That's not the point is, the point of the matter is that we don't hide away from our problems. We don't shove them under the carpet. We face them. We speak about them. We talk about them. We spend time on them. We're sitting here thousands of years later from the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, and we still have a day where we sit, days where we sit and we think, and then one big day where we sit on the floor and we do nothing. We don't eat, we don't sleep, we don't do anything. We just sit and we cry. Because sometimes that's just what feeling is. It's sitting and crying. There's no weakness in that. We tie so many labels and epithets with sitting and crying. We feel we're weak. We feel we're being vulnerable, and we are, but that's beautiful. What's the direct connection of Tisha B'Av and getting along with each other? Ahavat Yisrael, as opposed to Sinat Chinam, which destroyed the Beit HaMikdash, is being able to share with each other, because when we don't share with each other, it festers. It becomes shameful. A student of mine one time told me, you can't hate people just because you know their problem and they don't know yours. You know what they should be shameful about, and they don't know why you should be shameful. That's not a license now to do what to feel what you want about that person. It has to come from the inside of you. When we connect with other people, when we're open. In the beginning of Corona, my father had called together my siblings and I, and I believe it was Erev Shabbos. It might have been Erev Pesach. I don't know. It's one of them. And I don't remember. And he called us together and he said, guys, we need to work on, the Rebbeinu Shalom gave us this Nisayon, and we need to take advantage of what he's telling us. So we need to work on how we are in our homes, paying attention at home, and we need to work on how we respect our shuls, how we respect when we're together with other people in shul, how we behave there. I love this message so much, although I'm usually, and far be it from me to, give approval to a message my father's giving, but I'm usually against the message where someone starts to speak for God, saying that this tragedy happened because Hashem's upset about this. They always tend to choose, what it is that is involved in a different sect of Klal Yisrael, them doing. But my father always was saying that it's on us. It got to come from us. It has to happen through and from us. We're the ones that have to do something different over here. And I love that message. Because that's what this is about. That's what this is about. It comes from us. We need to realize that pain is the first step to joy. pain. You watch a child being born is painful. To the child, to the mother, to everyone. Just to the child and the mother. Not going to start saying, The difficulty of being able to connect, even though we're not the same. It starts with pain. It starts with hardship. Who's not in pain right now? Our first level of understanding of the loss of the Beit HaMikdash, of Tisha B'Av, is that all the pain, all the suffering, all the hurt, everything that we're feeling in the world is a part of that. And that's the first step to get through pain, is to realize it's not useless. It's not useless. You can have someone who wakes up with a little muscle pain, and they're annoyed by it all day and upset by it all day. Their arms hurting them. You can have a person in the gym who is voluntarily straining their muscles to get pain. One of them feels amazing about what they're doing. The other one's annoyed all day. Why? It's the same muscle pain. What's the difference? The difference is that the guy in the gym knows he's doing it for a reason. He knows what he's gaining from it. The person who's just suffering is just suffering. It's meaningless. I could live my life without this. We need to realize we can't live our lives without this pain. Our pain is meaningful. Our pain is all part of Klal Yisrael's pain. Any pain that we have, even on the most individual, small basis, any pain, any difficulty we have is because the Beis HaMikdash is not here. And the Ribono Shel Olam is giving that to us for us to shoulder that part of that burden. Because we're the chosen ones to do that. Our pain is collective. It's part of a whole. Which is why it's so crazy when we suffer in private. It's so detrimental to us. I'm not saying to suffer in public and put ourselves out and put all of our stuff out there. How do we suffer in public? How do we suffer that our pain is meaningful with other people? By accepting other people in their pain. By accepting other people in their difficulties. When we hear about a very, very wealthy person going through a little bit of a difficult time, I heard this the other week. A young man passed away. Young man. Younger. And someone said, it's so sad, his wife, she's a widow now. And someone said, Baruch Hashem, at least the family's very, very well-to-do, so. And I was thinking to myself, what does that have to do with anything? They're very well-to-do and what? And now the wife doesn't have to suffer about trying to figure out how to, Baruch Hashem, Klal Yisrael takes care of each other. Or she would have to, I don't know. But that's something that we think. People's pain is real. It doesn't matter what you think. It's not about us. It's not about what we think that they should be or having or not. People's pain is real. We need to be gorous their pain. We need to understand each other's pain. Accept each other as flawed people. And that's what makes us beautiful. That's what makes us different from each other. That's real acceptance. Accepting and understanding, not saying, I know what you should do differently. Real pain. Pain is a connector like nothing else. It's an electric connector for us. We can bind and bond ourselves with other people. But when we insist on being shameful, when we insist on shaming others and keeping it private and keeping it hidden, think about what we're telling our children here. If someone's suffering, if someone's going through a difficulty, someone was just telling me a story about his parents. And this is why I try never getting involved in there's a few things I try never getting involved in. One of them being a divorce, separation, divorce. The reason being that personally, I just I don't have I don't have the head for it. I'm trying to explain this, because I work with so many children that unfortunately are the children of divorce. That I'm very biased towards the kids. So I'm a very one-track mind with the whole thing. So I remember I was talking to a kid and he was telling me how my father was not well. His father was an addict actually, and he felt that that's how he was getting towards addiction and so on and so forth. And he felt that he always although his mother raised him basically, he always had this little amount of distrust towards her or disrespect in his mind, lack of respect towards her, because he felt she never understood that clearly his father was struggling. He said she never seemed to get that. And I got it, and I was a kid. The man's struggling. You can't expect him to be different than he is. I remember this kid saying that, and I was so blown away by that. I can't expect him. This is this man's son talking. I was barely around when the kid was being raised. Now, funnily enough, right now, his mother and him get along very, very well, but him and his father are actually building a beautiful relationship together. He said, I couldn't expect him to be something that he wasn't. And I saw in that the key to every relationship, and really the key to joy. When we accept people in that way, when we accept people on their terms, people think, well, I'm a doormat, people should just walk over me. No. This is a relationship. When we say a relationship is a two-way street, it means I'm going to understand you and you're going to understand me. You're going to understand where I'm coming from and I'm going to understand where you're coming from. In so many relationship issues that we have, in so many Ben Adam L'Chavero issues that we have, what happens? I'm walking, and I walk up to an apple tree and I want an orange. And I say from this apple tree, I would like an orange. The apple tree says, now usually the apple tree says, "Pah, you're a fool. You don't know anything about oranges. You don't want an orange. You want an apple. You want an apple." I'm like, I know what I want. I want an orange. And the apple tree says, no, you don't. You want an apple. Trust me, you want an apple. I'm like, no, I don't. I want an orange. It's like, no, you don't. I'm telling you right now, all you want an apple. And me and this tree argue back and forth. This is what we do in relationships all the time. We walk up to an apple tree and we demand an orange. The apple tree feels stupid. It feels silly. It feels worthless that it can't give me the orange. So what does it do? It offers me an apple. You know why? Because all it has is apples. Now, in reality, I don't know about the tree being right or wrong, but I know I'm a fool for standing in front of an apple tree demanding an orange. It's an apple tree. It can't give me anything but an apple. And if God surrounded me with apple trees and I want an orange, it's because I'm asking for the wrong fruit. If the example got away from you, let me explain. When we run into an interpersonal relationship issue, it's usually, whether it be family or friends, it's usually because of the story I'm telling myself. And the story over there that I'm telling myself is that I want an orange. And if I need an orange, that apple tree should be able to give me an orange. It's a fruit tree. Just let it put out a different fruit. It should change. Acceptance goes like this. It's an apple tree. Take the apple from it. And if you really need an orange, get an orange from an orange tree. But that's your journey. That's for you to find. This tree cannot give you anything that it can't give. It's not what it is. When we're with other people, we can't demand things that aren't ours. We can't demand things from them that they don't have to give. We accept them as they are. We accept them with what they have to give, with who they are and their strengths and their weaknesses. It's usually in a time of suffering that we have to come to this. When we look around at our lives and we realize that, again, step one, my suffering is not meaningless. My suffering matters. My suffering is for the growth of not only me, but everyone around me. I might not see why, which is going to be our last step. We're going to get to that. I might not see why. I don't know why. But I know that my suffering matters. Step 2 is that I look at those around me. I look at the people that I'm with. I look at the sinat chinam that I have in my life. And I realize that it's not a joke. It's not like I'm going to be nice to everybody because I want to be accepted. I'm going to legitimately work on the joy of other people, of celebrating other people, of accepting them as the apple tree that they are. Learning to make apple juice or apple pie or something, but learning to love them for the apple tree that they are. And last, and the most powerful part, the most powerful step, is stop the need to understand our suffering and start instead to feel it and know where it's coming from. That's what we need. Feel it and know where it's coming from. We have this need for certainty. We have this need for understanding. I want God to tell me why I'm going through this. Sometimes we'll tell our children to do something and they'll just listen. They have no idea why they're listening, but they're just going to listen. Why? Because it's not what we're telling them, it's who's telling them. If a stranger would say to them the same thing, they wouldn't listen. Why? Stranger, God forbid, would tell them, get into a car, they would say, no, I don't know you. I tell them, get into the car, sure, we're leaving. Why? Now, yes, granted. In case my wife is watching this, she's like, really? If you say get into the car, all of a sudden they're all following and tell you, she's right. Okay, maybe not. But why? Why are they not going to listen to a stranger, but they will listen to my wife? Well, very simply. Very simply. It's not what they're being told to do. It's not like it's difficult for them to get into the car. It's who's telling them to do it. It's not why we're suffering. It's not why we're being told to go into the car. It's who is giving it to us. Who puts all this into our life? It's all Him. It's all Him. First and foremost, we need to understand Hashem is holding my hand throughout this entire thing. He's here. I don't know why. You're right. I don't know why I'm going through this. And anyone who claims to know why everyone or every tragedy is happening is I'm sorry. It's foolish to say that. It's foolish to say we know why. But who? Everyone knows who. Everyone knows who. And when we know who, we can follow it. We can feel it. So I don't know why we need to feel. I don't know why we need to feel all this pain that we're going through nowadays. All this suffering, all this pain. And today's the day. I hear this so often on so many other days of the year. All the pain and suffering in the world, guys. Today's the day that we say that. Not tomorrow. Today. If you connect through pain, today's your day. If you have suffering in your life, today's your day. People who want to sleep through Tisha B'Av, I understand you. I do. I get it. But tomorrow, don't say my life is so difficult. Today was your day. Today's the day to say that. Today's the day to open up. Today's the day to go talk to somebody. Today's the day to start your journey through feeling your pain. And if you have this pain, if you have this shame, if you have this difficulty in your life, today's the day. You have a special siyata d'shmaya to start today, to start doing something about it today. Be vulnerable. Open up. Don't be shameful. Don't continue this process, this ugly machine we have working. Think about the kids that see this. What does that child see? That boy that I was talking about, that his mother can never accept his father because of everything his father was going through. I'm not saying it would have been easy for his mother. I'm not judging her. But from this kid's eyes, what was he taught? I'll tell you what he was taught. He told me. He said, I was taught that the best people are the best liars. Whoever can lie about their problems the best, those are the best people. That's the way you get far in life. If you can hide and lie the best, you're the best. That's not real. I don't need to tell anyone, that's not real. That's definitely not the message his mother wanted to give him, but that's the one he heard. Let's be open. Let's be honest. Let's talk. Talk with each other. A healthy person always wants to connect to other people. An unhealthy person always wants to be a recluse, always wants to separate himself or herself. Let's rise up, everyone. Let's take pain and turn it into true intrinsic joy. Let's take pain and start using it as a badge of honor towards our joy. Bezrat Hashem, we do that next year. We'll be so connected. We'll be so connected. We'll never need another Tisha B'Av again. Have an easy and meaningful fast, guys, and let's do all this together.
Hi, this is Shimon Kolyako from Torah Anytime, and I hope you're having a meaningful Tisha B'Av. If you don't have the brand new Torah Anytime app, you're really missing out. Baruch Hashem, about 8 months ago, after 3 years in the making and almost $1 million in investment, we launched a brand new app, and it's an absolute game changer. So go to the App Store, go to the Play Store, and make sure you have the app. The old app is blue, by the way, blue icon. If you have it, delete it, and the new app is white. And make sure you get it. You can absolutely love it and spread the word.
Ruben Kolyakov here with Torah Anytime. If you are being inspired this Tisha B'Av with the over 25 live streaming programs going on from around the world brought to you by Torah Anytime, please make a donation, help us continue spreading Torah all over the world. We're trying to get to 20 million hours of Torah learning every single year, and we could do it with your help. You can click on the donate button to the bottom right of this video player. Don't worry, it's not going to redirect you. You can quickly make your donation and continue getting inspired with all of our live events.
It's Tisha B'Av, 5782. And it's shocking that we're still here. Like the captive who's locked away in a cell, and every day he scratches a little notch on the wall so that he can keep track of time. How many days have gone by? How many weeks have gone by? Where is he at on the calendar? We too, the Jewish people, are like a captive that scratches our notches in the wall. And today, unfortunately, we start year 1000 953 of our exile. Today, Tisha B'Av is the day that we collectively as a Jewish people notch another scratch in the wall. We're still here, and it doesn't make any sense to us. We can't notch days anymore. We're already more than 712,000 days in exile. We're notching years, and we're at a year 1953 of this exile. We can't comprehend what that even means. How did we get here? It doesn't make any sense. The first time the Jewish people rebelled in a major way was in the desert. And they did a couple really bad things. They worshiped the golden calf. They believed the spies that came back and gave a bad report on Tisha B'Av. 3,334 years ago. And they cried all night long saying, "Oh, God hates us. God's only trying to bring us into the land of Israel to kill us. If only we could die here in the desert." And God said, "Fine. You want to die in the desert? You can die in the desert." And he decreed 40 years of wandering in the desert. But after 40 years, we came home. We crossed into the land of Israel with great miracles led by Joshua. And then we had our time in the land of Israel for about 900 years. There were periods of peace. There were periods of upheaval. We had a golden era. King Solomon built the first temple. That golden era eventually turned into a mix of idolatry, murder, licentiousness, and eventually God threw us out of his home and allowed the Babylonians to destroy his own house. And we were sent into exile, but for 70 years. For 70 years. And then we came home. And even when we were going into exile, we already had a prophecy telling us, for 70 years, you're going to have to suffer this. You're going to have to endure this. And we did. And we came back home. And we built another temple. And this time it was destroyed. And there were no prophets around to give us an expiration date for this exile. And this exile today enters year 1953. How do we understand this? Why is there seemingly no expiration date to this exile? How do you go from 40 to 70 to 1953? Manishtana ha-exile hazos mikol ha-exiles. Why is this exile different than all the other ones? And if it is different, how do we get out of here? How do we get out of this exile? Let's try to define the terms a little bit. What is this exile and how does it affect us? We seem here in this room, watching this right now, we seem to be living relatively comfortable lives. We have homes. We have air conditioning. We have heating. We have wardrobes full of clothing. We go on vacations. We have a refrigerator full of food. We throw out leftovers. Baruch Hashem, we're living in a time of peace. What is this? What is the horror of the exile? Obviously, there were many times during this exile that there were horrific periods for the Jewish people. But so was there when we had the temple. What happened when we lost the Beis HaMikdash, the temple, and specifically the second temple? The Talmud, in Tractate Bava Batra, page 3b, tells the story of Herod. Now, anybody who's gone on a tour of Israel knows all about Herod. Herod was a great, brilliant architect. He was the one who built the Kotel HaMa'aravi, the Western Wall, where we go to pray. And indeed, anytime you go on a trip, they point out to you the Herodian stone, which is a massive, massive piece of stone with a little, about a 2-inch sort of frame around the stone to say, this is one of Herod's stones. And indeed, when you go to Ma'arat HaMachpelah, you go to the cave of the patriarchs in Hebron, and you notice the very same stone, Herodian stone, and indeed that too was built, a massive building around the cave of the patriarchs where Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Rachel and Leah, and not Rachel, but Sarah and Rebecca and Leah and Adam and Eve are buried. They've got this massive edifice, Herodian stone. You go to Caesarea, where they have the hippodrome and the massive port, built by none other than Herod. Masada, the stronghold on top of a mountain in the middle of the desert, that at once sprouted with pools and water and agriculture, and a stronghold that was able to hold off the might of the Roman Empire for years, built by Herod. Some people call him Herod the Great. Some people call him Herod the Insane. Who was Herod? The Gemara tells us in Bava Basra, again, 3b, Hordus Avda de Beis Chashmonai Hava. Herod was a slave from the Hasmonean dynasty, the Chashmonaim. The Chashmonaim were the Kohanic family that drove out the Greeks during the wars around Hanukkah, the whole Hanukkah celebration. The Greeks were occupying Israel. And there was the group of Kohanim, led under Matisyahu Kohen Gadol, Matisyahu the high priest, who cried out, Mila Hashem Elai, whoever is to God, come to me. And a little ragtag band of Kohanim forced back the might of the Greek Empire. And when they declared victory, what they were supposed to do is step aside and allow the Davidic dynasty to continue, because that was exactly what our patriarch Jacob had said, Lo Yasser Shevet mi Yehuda, the scepter will not leave the tribe of Judah. And the Kohanim, after gaining victory, were supposed to step aside and allow the dynasty of the house of David to continue, but they did not. They decided to rule, and they started their own dynasty called the Hasmonean dynasty, the Chashmonaim, Malchus Beis Chashmonaim. And it ended horribly. And it ended with Hordus, Herod. Says the Gemara, Herod was a slave. And he found himself attracted to a young maiden from the royal family of the Hasmonean dynasty. And he very much wanted to marry her, to connect with her. One day, Herod is walking, and he hears a divine voice that says, any slave who rebels now will succeed. That's an invitation. So Herod immediately gathers a bunch of slaves together, and they make a rebellion, and they start killing off every member of the Hasmonean dynasty until there's nobody left but the one girl that Herod wanted. The girl recognizes that she's the very last of the entire Hasmonean dynasty, and she runs up to the roof of the palace, and she yells out, I am the last remaining survivor of the Hasmonean dynasty. We've been overtaken by rebels. Slaves have taken over the palace. I am the last remaining daughter of the Hasmonean dynasty. If anybody tells you that they are the king, know that they are a slave. And she leaps off the roof and falls to her death. Now Herod preserves her body for 7 years in honey. You know, today they find sometimes the whole idea behind Jurassic Park was that you could find the DNA of very ancient animals found preserved in the mosquitoes and the amber. Sometimes you'll have, like, things will get caught in amber and it will harden, and you'll have the ability to catch insects that lived thousands and thousands of years ago that were perfectly preserved in amber. So this man, Herod, preserved her for 7 years. Some say he tried to live with her as a husband and wife. Some say he just wanted everyone to believe he had his queen next to him by his side. Think about the insanity. Like, oh, here's my queen from the Hasmonean dynasty. I married into the Hasmonean dynasty. And everyone could see that your queen is dead at your side, preserved in honey. Just to understand what we're talking about. And then he proceeded to build some of the most fabulous, amazing structures in the world. But he was always paranoid. The reason why he built Masada was because he was paranoid. He was always paranoid. When you are a slave who rebels and overtakes your master, you're always afraid that somebody else will make a rebellion and kill you. So he decided, though, he had an axe to grind with the rabbis, because the rabbis were able to read the Torah properly and understand that the Torah says that you're supposed to som tasim alecha melech mikarav achecha. The pasuk says, the verse says in the Torah, you shall set for yourself a king from the midst of your brethren. And he knew he was not from the midst of the brethren. He was not from the Jewish people. He was from a slave. So he had an axe to grind with the rabbis. So he killed all the rabbis. All the rabbis. Except for Bava ben Buta. He left Bava ben Buta alive in order to ask counsel of him. Amazing. You kill all the rabbis, but you leave one alive so you can ask counsel of him. Kind of reminds me like the Spanish in 1492. We're going to exile all the Jews, but you, Don Abarbanel, the royal treasurer, you could stay, because we want to ask counsel of you. Maybe you could continue to stay on as our treasurer and make sure our economy is humming. Unbelievable. History repeats itself again and again and again. Kill all the Jews, but leave the ones that we like. Because the Jews are bad, but this particular one actually is a pretty nice guy. Now, when he killed all the rabbis, he left Bava ben Buta alive and he blinded him. He put like a garland made out of porcupine skin onto Bava ben Buta's head, blinding him. And one day Herod comes and he starts conversing with Bava ben Buta. Again, Bava ben Buta can't see anything, so he's trying to get Bava ben Buta to say anything against the king. Because he'll see, I was right. These rabbis, they're always trying to rebel. But Bava ben Buta is not buying it. Bava ben Buta doesn't say a single bad word about the king. And this man keeps trying to get him and goad him. Come on, don't you want the king to die? Why don't you curse the king? You're so powerful. You're a rabbi. If you curse the king. And Bava ben Buta uses verses and wit and wisdom to deflect. And finally, Herod says, if I would have known that the rabbis were like you, I would never have killed all the rabbis. A little bit late. A little bit late. A little bit like Warsaw post-World War II that had no more doctors left. They killed off all the Jews, but they also killed off more than 95% of the doctors in their city. If only we had known that the Jews do so much good for us. If only the Spanish had known that the Jews do so much good, and that after they kicked out the Jews from Spain, Spain would start falling as a world power, and the Netherlands would rise and become the center of world commerce for 200 years because the Jews all fled to Amsterdam. If only they knew. It's always a little bit too late. So Herod says, man, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have killed all the rabbis. What should I do now? I kind of feel bad. So what does Herod say to him? What does Bava ben Buta say to him? Bava ben Buta says to him, he says, I want to fix it. I want to make up for what I did. Bava ben Buta says to him, Hu kiba oro shel olam, you destroyed the light of the worlds. Dichsiv ki ner mitzvah v'torah or. Because the verse says that a mitzvah is like a lamp, and the Torah is like the light. The Torah is compared to the light. You killed off all the sages. They were the receptacles of Torah in the world. What should you do? V'yasok ba'oro shel olam, be involved with the light of the world. There's something else that's called light. The temple. Dichsiv v'naharu elav Kol HaGoyim, as the verse says, and all the words, and all the nations shall flow to it, all the nations shall be lit up by it. And he recommends to Herod that Herod should rebuild the temple in a much more beautiful fashion. And indeed, the Temple Mount that we see today, when we go to the Kotel and we see that massive wall, that was essentially Herod's attempt to gain forgiveness for killing the rabbis of the world. What do we see? What is the temple described as? The temple is described as Oro Shel Olam, the light of the world. Indeed, the Medrash tells us in Vayikra Rabbah 31:7, Rabbi Chanina says the temple windows were very different than most windows in the world. When you would go see a castle, and you can still see castles to this very day, when you see a castle, generally speaking, they have small slits for windows. Why? Because they were always worried about archery. Their threat was that soldiers would mass on the outside and they'd be shooting arrows and slingshots, those big Voyagers, whatever those called, the onagers, and the big slingshots against them. So you wanted as small window as possible. You could look out and you could shoot a bow and arrow from that small window, but there wasn't a lot. They'd have to aim really perfectly to get in. It was very, very hard. And then, though, if you look at all these castles, you'll see that there's a little slit for a window, and then the window pulls out, it starts broadening and becoming more wide because you want as much light as possible in the room. So if you have just a slit all the way through the 2-foot thick wall, all you're going to get is a sliver of light. But if you make a slit for the hole and then you open up the window, the light comes in. But says the Medrash in Vayikra Rabbah, in the temple was exactly the opposite. There was a little small slit that was open on the inside of the temple windows, but then it broadened and opened up to show that God was giving light to the world from here. The temple was the light of the world. We don't have a temple. We don't have light. What does that look like? I think when I say we don't have light today, I think you can relate a little bit more to what I'm saying than if I was speaking 5 years ago. We looked at a world that just went through a lot of upheaval, and we all know that a lot of upheaval is ahead of us. But we start thinking about a world without light, a world in which, what does light enable us to do? Light enables us to navigate without bumping into anybody. Light enables us to navigate the world without getting stuck and stumbling and falling and tripping and hurting ourselves. And we're living in a world where that's getting a little bit more complicated. Let's try to break it down a little bit more. The first temple was destroyed for what? 3 cardinal sins: idolatry, licentiousness, and murder. These are all what we're going to put under the rubric of lusts and urges, right? I fly off the handle and I kill somebody. That's an anger. Licentiousness, even idolatry. The Gemara says in Sanhedrin 63b, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav. Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Rav. The Jewish people knew that there was no reality to idol worship. When you go whittle yourself a god, you come home and you go back to your little arts and crafts workshop and you start sculpting out this god, this eagle god or this light god or whatever it is, and you're finally finished and you put it on your mantelpiece and you start bowing down to it every day. You've got a little bit of an inkling that maybe this isn't really God. When you've got a god like the Roman pantheon or the Greek pantheon, gods that are getting drunk and stealing each other's wives, I think deep down you might know that this is not really a god. This is a sick human. Mind you, if the gods from Greek and Roman mythology lived today, we would all keep our children very far away, and most of them would not be allowed to get within 300 feet of a school, if you know what I'm saying. That these were sick people. Sick gods, according to them. So the first temple was a time of incredible urges, lusts. There was also incredible emotional stimulation for the good. There was all kinds of prophets. There was miracles happening. So the first temple is much more of an emotional experience of connection with God. On one hand, you can see incredible miracles. What is that? It's an emotional, wow. You could go to the temple and see miracles all the time. Amazing. There was prophets everywhere. Wow. This guy told me what's going to happen and it came true. But then there was also all kinds of emotional urges for licentiousness and promiscuity, anger, murder, rage. Second temple, we didn't have any of those things. We've covered this in previous classes, but in the Second Temple era, there was no more idolatry. There was no more open miracles. There was no more prophecy. We moved to a more intellectual form of serving God. We moved into an intellectual form. Prayer became much more prevalent. Prayer, as we have it today, was only instituted in the beginning of the Second Temple era, when we moved to a more intellectual connection with God. Instead of prophets, there now was an abundant amount of Torah scholarship and more rabbis. First temple, prophets, miracles. Lusts and urges, second temple. Rabbis, intellectualism, Talmud study. Well, not yet Talmud, but the study of the oral law. The beginning of those authors of the oral law, the beginnings of the authors of the Mishnah start during the Second Temple era. And of course, who destroys the Second Temple? The Greeks and the Romans. The Greeks come first, we kick them out, the Romans. And what are they known for? All their philosophy, Western thought. The beginning of a whole new way of looking at the world. Plato, Aristotle, Seneca, the School of Athens, the universities of Rome. Okay, so now we're in the exile from the Second Temple. What does that look like? The wisdom of the Roman Empire was mostly lost during the Dark Ages. When Rome fell, and studying why Rome fell is a fascinating, fascinating study to understand the world we live in today. I mean, really, if you want to understand the world we're living in right now, I recommend you read a lot about the fall of Rome. It's a fascinating, there's so many corollaries. But when Rome fell, the hordes, the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths and all the different, the Germanic tribes that came in and destroyed Rome, one of the first things they did is they sacked all the universities, they burned the universities, they burned the libraries. The people who attacked Rome were people who did not have a lot of intellectual learning. They were warriors, brute warriors, and they just destroyed the universities, the libraries, and then the world went into the Dark Ages. It starts emerging from the Dark Ages with the Renaissance in the 1300s, when we start bringing back teachings from the great Greeks and Romans that have been lost to Europe for hundreds of years, but have been preserved by these scholars in the Muslim world, and we start bringing them back into the world. And then we have the age of the Renaissance, a flourishing of art and culture and music, bringing back the Rome and Greek way. And that leads to the Enlightenment. The Age of Enlightenment. What is the Age of Enlightenment? Well, I'm going to give you the Wikipedia definition. Not that Wikipedia can really truly define anything, because Wikipedia is fully subjective and often the victim of cross-changing and changing and back-changing, and Wikipedia itself will tell you this is not exactly a scientific journal, but I will give you the Wikipedia definition of the Age of Enlightenment. The Age of Enlightenment, or simply the Enlightenment, was an intellectual and philosophical movement that dominated Europe in the 17th and 18th centuries with global influences and effects. The Enlightenment included a range of ideas centered on the values of human happiness. Think about this, human happiness, the pursuit of knowledge obtained by the means of reasons and the evidence of the senses, and ideals such as liberty, progress, toleration, fraternity, constitutional government, and separation of church and state. Now, America could be said to be partly as a result of the Age of Enlightenment. America happens to have been one of the more successful. You had the French Revolution. Didn't work out too well. Blood was flowing in the streets there for a long time. How did the reality of the Age of Enlightenment end? Or continue? It's still going on right now. There's a very, very famous quote from Nietzsche, one of the great philosophers of that age. And in 1882, he wrote his famous line, "God is dead." What did he write? He wrote, I'm going to read it to you. God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives? We killed God. Who will wipe this blood off of us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement? What sacred games for us to clean ourselves? What sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it? Nietzsche is saying, we've killed God. In our age of reason, in the age of enlightenment, in our pursuit of intellectual and philosophical ideals, we decided we want to pursue happiness, which was never a spiritual pursuit. Spiritual pursuit was always to pursue goodness. Happiness was supposed to be a side byproduct. The pursuit of knowledge obtained by the means of reason and the evidence of the senses. If I don't see it, it doesn't exist. How did that work out for us? How's the world been doing since that time? Not too great. Let's think about the great movements that came out of here. We have the communist movement, right? Let's figure out how to be gods ourselves. Nietzsche said we got to become gods ourselves. If we killed God, we got to become gods ourselves. How did that work out for the world? The deaths of hundreds of millions, gulags, starvation. The Nazi movement. Here are the brilliant people of the world. The most scientifically advanced people in the world. The people who study and use the reason of what we can evidence with our own eyes were also convinced that the Jewish people were vermin that must be wiped out. Imagine the scene. The scene of Dr. Janusz Korczak, who was a famous children's author, whose real name was Henry Goldschmidt. He took it upon himself during the Warsaw Ghetto to create an orphanage. And while all the chaos was going on, and the people were starving and dying of illness and hunger and starvation, he kept an orphanage going. And then finally, on either August 4th or 5th of 1942, they were commanded to bring all the children to the Umschlagplatz, from where they would be taken to Treblinka. Dr. Janusz Korczak was offered multiple times to save himself. A, he was a doctor. B, he was a very famous and beloved child's writer. He had written many of the children's books. He was like a Dr. Seuss. But no, he said, I'm going to remain with my children. And on that morning, he told them that we're going to leave the ghetto of Warsaw, and all the death that you've seen, and all the illness, and the violence. We're going to go to a beautiful vacation in the countryside where there's going to be meadows and fresh water, and we can play in the brooks and the streams. And he had all the children dress up in their most beautiful clothing. They made sure to wash the clothing. The children come that morning and they're lined up, 2 at a time. And Dr. Janusz Korczak is walking in the front, holding the hands of a little child, making sure that everyone's clothing is buttoned and everyone looks perfectly. And the SS man is leading them. This is the most brilliant scientific civilization in the world. The Germans. This is the age of enlightenment, right? We said we don't need really God. We don't need God's wisdom. We can light up the world ourselves. We don't need the Beis HaMikdash. We don't need the temple to be Oro Shel Olam. We don't need the temple to be the light of the world. We can figure this out ourselves. We've got this. Science has a plan. until the scientifically most advanced civilization in the world is marching children to their death, is tossing children out of the babies, out of the windows of the 6th floor of apartment buildings and catching them in bayonets. This is science. The age of enlightenment. We don't need God. We've got this figured out. And then we move to the communist movement. Again, they were very anti-God. We've got this figured out. We can be our own God. We live in a world today. So again, the second temple, first temple, urges and lusts, very emotional. The negative side is idolatry, promiscuity, licentiousness. Second temple era, it's all about the intellectual. Do you recognize that the light of the world comes from the temple and the Torah within and the godly wisdom? Or do you think we don't really need God? Because that was the opinion of the Greeks and the Romans and the age of enlightenment. Here we are today. We live in a world today that is a very, in my opinion, scary world. In the last few years, under the name of science, we've been told things that are contrary to our own eyes. A is B and B is A. And if you say anything otherwise, you're not following the science. And I'm not talking about COVID necessarily. We are living in an epidemic of scientific fraud. Lancet, the journal, one of the most respected medical journals in the world, in 2015, had an article where they were writing that somewhat as close to half of research being published today in science journals is fraud, up to half. They don't know the exact number. The need to push out articles today is incredible if you're in academia. And if your thesis didn't work out, you're not going to sit out for 3 years until you do a whole nother study. You falsify the data. But we were told, but we were promised, just follow the science. You don't need God. Go with the Roman and Greek way. You can do this. A godless world is a world of dog eat dog. A godless world is a world in which we don't even know who we are, we don't know what we are anymore, and we lose track. What we want to come out of Tisha B'Av with is the recognition that more than anything, what we need back in this world is godly wisdom. We have, on our own as humanity, we have broken down the Jewish people with their embrace of the Greek and Roman ideals, which led the Jewish people to feeling it was a zero-sum game. Because again, in the scientific world, you're in a zero-sum game often. That led to hatred of one another. That led to breaks in the Jewish community. Because if I got to figure it all out and I think I'm right and you're not right, we get into a war. If I feel like you're on one side of the divide and I'm on the other side, I don't talk to you anymore. I don't call my sister anymore. She voted for fill in the blank. We get into a world of divisions. We get into a world where we lose perspective. If we want to end this exile, the reason why we're in this exile so much longer, if you're in exile for urges and lusts, I can put away a behavior. It may take 70 years, but I can put away bad behavior. I can't easily put away my entire ego and my intellectual prowess and to say that I need to be intellectually subservient to a greater wisdom. But that's what's keeping us here for 1953 years. We still haven't figured out that the same God who created the world and created molecules and created neutrons and created galaxies and black holes and the medulla oblongata and thousands and millions of gut species in your bio, just in your gut biome alone, is the same God that was able to come up with a brilliant way of living. We understand that God could have created an incredible world, but when he tells me what I got to do and how I have to treat other people, maybe he doesn't get it. I can figure this one out myself. Follow the science. The more we are ready to accept God's wisdom, to accept God's prescription for good living, to bring that into our lives, to bring that into our families, the more we're turning back the lights for the world on. The world's in a dark place now. It's our job to turn the lights back on. We reach out to our brother, we reach out to our sister, we rekindle relationships that were destroyed by my ego and me thinking I have it all figured out and having no room for other people with any other views. We go back to the basics and we start to rebuild the temple one brick at a time. And when we do that, we'll be able to see the prophecy of Isaiah from the chapter 60, verses 1, Kumi ori kiva orech, arise, shine, for your light has dawned. Ukvod Hashem alayich zarcha, the presence of the Lord is shining upon you. Ki hine hachoshech yichas haaretz, because there will be a time where darkness will cover the earth. Va'arafel le'umim, and thick clouds over peoples. V'alayich yizrach Hashem, but on you God will shine down his light. Ukvodo alayich yera'eh, and his glory will be seen upon you. V'holchu goyim la'orech, and nations shall start to go and walk by your light. Umalachim lenoga zarchech, and kings by your shining radiance. When we go back to what we're supposed to be, when we understand what our role in the world is and our ability to bring godliness into the world, then we light up the world for everybody in the world, and the world receives its entire and full tikkun, its rectification, the truest form of tikkun olam, the truest form of, this is really what it's all about. It's not about environmentalism. It's about bringing back the light to the world in a world that's been very, very dark. May God give us the energy and the wisdom and the foresight to do that and bring back the light and bring back the temple. Thank you.
Hi, this is Shimon from Torah Anytime, and Torah Anytime is currently working on many, many new future projects. And if anyone out there is listening who wants to partner with us to hear what these projects are all about, to see if it's something that they resonate with, to see if there's something they want to back financially or partner with us in any other way, please reach out to me. My email is shimon@torahanytime.com. Let's have a conversation about it, and let's see if the new upcoming projects of Torah Anytime excite you.
Ruben Kol Yaakov here with Torah Anytime. You might have heard about 2 years ago, we came out with a new program called Chesed Anytime. Baruch Hashem, we have thousands and thousands of users. For those who are looking to do a chesed for somebody, or those who are looking for somebody to do a chesed for them, you can go to WhatsApp. If you have WhatsApp, currently it's a WhatsApp status. You could save this number on your phone, 929-602-9300, and WhatsApp message add me. And then you can check out the statuses. If you need a chesed done for you, you can message that number and let them know as well.
Hi, I'm Rabbi Pinchas Landis of Cleveland, Ohio, and I am the program coordinator for the TorahAnyone Tisha B'Av event. We are very excited to bring you some of the most inspiring speakers in the Jewish world to help us all find meaning on this most riveting of days. For 3,000 years, the Jewish people have looked towards Tisha B'Av as a day of introspection, a day to mourn past events and tragedies, but above all, a day to look at, to learn from, and to take inspiration from. This indeed is why we are still here as a people after 3,000 Tisha B'Avs. Because we don't look at events, no matter how dark they might be, as random. We look at them as building blocks to help us grow as people and to make us ever stronger as a nation. I invite you now to join me on a day of inspiration that, God willing, we will all grow from. And from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank you for joining us and thank you for your attention.
Tisha B'Av, the day we mourn the destruction of the temple, a day marked with sorrow and sadness. Why is that? Why are we sad about something that happened so long ago? An event that we really can't fix, and a building that we never really knew and don't really miss. Maybe this period of time is not about sadness. Maybe it's about something else. Imagine a guy named Dave who has a father named John. Dave has a lot of respect for his dad. He calls him on weekends, he sees him on holidays, and they get together on occasion. Dave loves his father, but they're not really close. One day Dave gets a phone call that his father was in a terrible accident and he's in the hospital. Dave rushes there, and when he gets to the doctors say, "We're so sorry. We did everything we could and your father passed away." Dave's heartbroken. He begins the period of mourning, and he starts to sit shiva. On the first day, somebody comes in and says, "Oh my gosh, your father helped me with this and did this, and he was amazing." And Dave says, "I don't even think I know my father." The next day, "Your father loved you so much. He always spoke about you. He was so proud of you." And Dave said, "Really?" With each day, with each story, Dave feels closer and closer to his father and misses him more and more. On the last day, the doctors come in to pay their respects. They look at the mantle and say, "I'm sorry, why does it say John Levine on the mantle?" And Dave says, "That was my father's name." And the doctors say, "John? The man who passed away was Josh Levine. John Levine's still in the hospital. He's recovering." Now pause for a second. What would Dave do? You think he would say, "Whew, so happy. Do me a favor, when you get there, just tell him I'll call him later"? You think he'd be like, "Okay, listen, I got a busy week. Maybe I'll visit him in a month"? If there was a brick wall at the door, Dave would go right through it to see his dad. Why? Last week he forgot to call, and now he's going through brick walls? What changed? Focus. The goal of mourning is focus. Mourning shifts our attention to the deceased. We stop our daily lives and we put all our attention on them. And as you start to focus on them, you start to appreciate them. You realize how important they are and how much you want them in your life. You see, since mourning usually takes place after somebody dies, the more you focus on somebody, the sadder you get because they're not here anymore. But mourning doesn't equal sadness. Not if the object of your focus is still alive. We're not sad over the destruction of the temple. The temple wasn't a building. It represented a time in which God's presence was more felt in the world. We mourn because God is telling us, focus on me. He's saying, remember that as comfortable as you think you are, this is not the ideal. If you focus on me, you'll start to appreciate what life could be like with me in it. Me, your heavenly Father, could be a greater part of your life. Imagine a world with greater clarity. Imagine greater meaning and purpose. Imagine a world without the challenges of disunity and violence and fighting and fear. Imagine a world without uncertainty, without the ills of so much of what we've been conditioned to endure. By mourning a world without God's clear presence, we stop our daily lives and focus on Him. And by doing so, we get closer and closer to Him. And the more we focus on Him, so to speak, the more He focuses on us. Tisha B'Av is not supposed to be about sadness. It's supposed to be about yearning. It's the time in which we focus on how our lives could be so much greater with God's presence in it. And by building up that yearning, by building up that longing, we emerge even more committed to go through any walls that separate us from Him. Jewish history is filled with moments of excitement, joy, and miracles, but unfortunately, also moments of tragedy. And while the Jews have suffered in many ways for many years, there was no greater tragedy than that of the destruction of the temple almost 2,000 years ago. That moment is the cause of all suffering since. I would assume that there must be a litany of horrible sins that cause this calamity, but there isn't. There's just one. The Talmud is clear and explicit as to the sole cause of separation, a lack of unity and brotherly love. What? Unity? That's the reason? Not murder, idolatry, and big bad sins like that? It's that we didn't get along? I mean, come on. All this tragedy because I dislike someone for no reason? Because I gossip? I'm not nice enough to my friend? I feel jealous? How could that be? Let me tell you a story. When I was in high school, I was on the hockey team. One year we made the playoffs. A week before the game, my good friend and teammate and I got into a fight. We stopped speaking to each other and it got very tense. Game day was different between us. We used to be in real sync, but this time we weren't. I just didn't feel like helping him score, and I think he felt the same way. We were down 2-0 after the first period. We went into the locker room, and the coach was not happy. He waited for quiet and said to everybody, "For us to win this game, winning has to be everyone's number one focus. If it's not, let me know so someone else can take your spot out there." We all nodded. We've heard this speech before. We screamed, "Go team," and started filing out of the locker room. The coach stopped me and my friend. "You two are benched for the second period." "What? Why?" "Because winning isn't your number one focus." He said, "I don't know what's going on between the two of you, nor do I care. If your number one focus was winning, it wouldn't matter who scores, who looks better, who gets to be the hero. For a team to win a playoff game, it needs to join together, drop their egos, and unite under the same goal. For you two, winning is important, but that's not your number one focus out there today. You are more important than us. So until you change your attitude, you're not playing in my game." As Jews, we have to ask ourselves, why are we here? We are here for the unique task of bringing God into the world, infusing His ideals, His love to others. When we're easily angered, feel jealous and envious, when we hold on to our egos, when we don't extend our hand to help someone in need, we're showing God, "You're not the most important person. I am. That person isn't a teammate of mine who will join me to increase your honor. That's a competitor of mine that'll diminish my glory." You see, unity is not just about how we treat each other. It's also a litmus test about how we feel towards God. A lack of unity shows that even if we look, talk, and dress otherwise, we really don't believe He's in the center of the world. We think we're the center of the world. And by choosing ourselves over God, we lose a piece of that specialness. We lose the right to His home. Take a minute and ask yourself, what am I playing for? My honor, my recognition, fame, or fortune, or His? If it's His, if we start to shift our focus from me to God, then we look around and start to see teammates and not competitors. We start to unify, and then nothing could stop us.